Imagine you are sitting at your desk on a typical Tuesday morning. You have a coffee beside you, the office is relatively quiet, and you are working on something that actually matters. Maybe it is a complex strategy document, a difficult piece of code, or a delicate piece of writing. You start to make progress, you find a rhythm, and then you hit a point of friction. The task gets hard. The next sentence does not come easily. The logic is tricky. So what do? Almost by pure instinct, your hand moves the mouse. You open a new tab. You check your email. Just a quick glance, you tell yourself. You see a message from a client or a colleague. It is not an emergency, but it requires a thoughtful response. You cannot deal with it right now, so you tell yourself you will handle it later. You close the tab. You go back to your important work. You think you have seamlessly transitioned back to the document, but you have not. You feel a subtle drag, a slight fog in your mind. The words do not flow as easily. The logic does not click into place. You think you are just a bit tired today. But what you are experiencing is not fatigue. It is a specific, measurable cognitive phenomenon. It is a physical reality in your brain. Every time you switch your attention away from a hard task to a different context, your mind does not immediately follow you back. A piece of your focus remains stuck to that email. And that stuck piece of attention is quietly destroying your ability to do your best work. Today, we are going to look closely at what happens to our minds when we constantly shift our focus. We're going to explore why working in a state of constant, quick checks is physically preventing you from reaching peak cognitive performance. We will look at the psychological science behind this friction. And most importantly, we will figure out how to clean up the residue, clear the mental fog, and reclaim the profound power of a fully focused mind. Hello and welcome. It is wonderful to be here with you again. If we have not met before, think of this time as a space where we step back from the noise of our daily lives and look deeply at the ideas that shape our reality. Today we are tackling something that affects almost every single one of us who works with our minds. We live in a world that demands our attention constantly. We are told that we need to be responsive. We are told that a quick glance at our messages is harmless and that being connected makes us better professionals. But I want to show you today that this belief is fundamentally flawed. In this episode, you will understand exactly why that feeling of exhaustion at the end of the day is not just about how many hours you worked, but how many times you broke your attention. You might completely rethink how you structure your mornings and how you design your workspace. You will be able to look at your smartphone not just as a tool, but as an engine of cognitive friction. My promise to you today is simple. By the time we finish our conversation, you will have a clear scientific understanding of your own attention, and you will have practical, tested strategies to protect it. You will be able to do better work in less time with significantly less stress. So find a comfortable spot, settle in, and let us begin. Let us lay out the core idea clearly. For a long time, we talked about the dangers of doing two things at once. We called it multitasking. We learned from various studies that the human brain cannot actually process two complex cognitive tasks simultaneously. But as our modern work environment evolved, a new pattern emerged. People realized they were not really multitasking in the traditional sense. Instead, they were doing something else. They were working sequentially. They were going from one meeting to the next, starting one project, and then suddenly having to transition to another. It became completely normal to have 5 different tabs open on a browser and to jump between them, one after the other. It feels highly productive. It feels like you are managing a complex, fast-paced life. But in 2009, a business professor named Sophie Leroy published a paper with a fascinating title. The title was, "Why is it so hard to do my work?" She wanted to understand the hidden cost of this constant sequential switching. To explain what she found, she introduced a concept called attention residue. Leroy designed an experiment in a laboratory to test this. She brought in subjects and gave them a set of word puzzles to solve. Then, right in the middle of their effort, she interrupted them. She told them they needed to stop what they were doing and move on to a new, challenging task. This new task involved reading resumes and making hypothetical decisions about hiring people. In other variations of her experiment, she let the people finish the word puzzles completely before giving them the resumes to read. What she found was incredibly revealing. When she tested the participants to see how much of the first task was still lingering in their minds, the results were entirely clear. The people who were forced to switch tasks before finishing the first one were experiencing a thick residue of attention. A part of their brain was still stuck thinking about the word puzzles while they were trying to evaluate the resumes. And because their attention was divided in this way, their performance on the second task was poor. The more intense the residue they experienced, the worse they performed on the hiring task. This is the absolute foundation of our conversation today. When you switch from task A to task B, your attention does not immediately follow. It lags behind. It sticks to the previous context, especially if that previous context was left unresolved. What do most people believe instead? Most people believe that human attention is like a light switch. You flick it off in one room and flick it on in another, and the light is immediately at full brightness. They think that if they just look at an email for 10 seconds, it does not cost them anything because it only took 10 seconds. They think time is the only metric of work that matters. They believe that if they spend 4 hours writing a report, even if they check their phone 20 times during those 4 hours, they have still done 4 hours of solid work. But this is completely wrong. It is a dangerous illusion. They are ignoring the cognitive friction. Every single time you look away from the report and look at a message, you are forcing your brain to load an entirely new context. And when you turn back to the report, your brain has to drop that context and reload the original report. But it does not drop it cleanly. It leaves a smear of attention behind. If you do this 20 times in an afternoon, you are systematically degrading your cognitive capacity. You are operating with a fraction of your actual intelligence. Let me give you a concrete scenario to anchor this idea. Think about a brilliant computer programmer. Let us call him Thomas. Thomas is trying to write a complex script for a new software feature. It requires holding multiple variables and logic paths in his head at the exact same time. He is just about to solve a critical problem in the code, but his phone vibrates on his desk. He glances down. It is a text from a friend asking about dinner plans for the weekend. Thomas thinks to himself, I will just answer this quickly so I do not forget. He types a quick reply. He looks back at his screen. But the delicate architecture of the logic he had built in his mind has completely collapsed. The variables have slipped away. He has to spend the next 15 minutes just reconstructing the mental model he had perfectly balanced before the text message arrived. That is attention residue in action. It is a silent thief of our potential. It takes us from curious and capable to frustrated and stagnant without us even realizing what is happening. Now here's where it gets interesting. This is the intellectual heart of our exploration today. We need to go deeper into the tensions and the paradoxes that make this idea genuinely complex. You see, the idea of attention residue does not just apply to obvious distractions like social media or text messages. It applies to the very structure of how we are told to do professional work. There is a paradox in modern professional life. We revere people who are highly responsive. We view the person who answers an email within 5 minutes as a dedicated, hard-working employee. But at the exact same time, the most valuable work in our economy requires long periods of uninterrupted concentration. We are demanding two completely incompatible behaviors from ourselves and from each other. You cannot be highly responsive and highly focused at the same time. The attention residue generated by checking your inbox every 10 minutes prevents your brain from ever reaching the depth required to produce truly elite, high-quality output. Let us bring in a historical example that adds unexpected richness to this tension. Long before smartphones existed, the famous psychiatrist Carl Jung understood the necessity of unbroken concentration. In the early 1920s, Jung was trying to revolutionize our understanding of the unconscious mind. He was pushing back against the ideas of his former mentor, Sigmund Freud, which was a very bold move at the time. To produce the deeply original work required to establish his new school of thought, Jung realized he could not stay in his busy city lifestyle in Zurich. His lectures and counseling practice kept him constantly busy, but he knew that busyness alone would not change the world. So, what did he do? He retreated to a small village named Bollingen, near the shores of Lake Zurich. There, he built a 2-story stone house that he called the Tower. He built this retreat not as a vacation home, but as a place strictly designed to promote deep, undistracted work. In his private office inside the tower, he kept the key with him at all times. No one was allowed in without his explicit permission. He would spend 2 hours every morning in undistracted writing time, pushing his cognitive capabilities to their absolute limit. Jung intuitively understood something that modern neuroscience is just now proving. He understood that you cannot wring every last drop of value out of your intellectual capacity if you are constantly available to the world. This brings us to a fascinating psychological nuance. Why does the residue stick so stubbornly? To understand this, we have to look at something called the Zeigarnik effect. This effect is named after Bluma Zeigarnik, a psychologist working in the early 20th century. Her experiments revealed a fundamental truth about human nature. Incomplete tasks dominate our attention. When you start something and do not finish it, your brain sets up a kind of background alarm system. It keeps reminding you of the unresolved issue. So, when you open your email and see a message from your boss that you cannot answer right away, you have just created an incomplete task. You have triggered the Zeigarnik effect. Even when you close your email and go back to your spreadsheet, your brain is quietly diverting valuable energetic resources to keeping that unresolved email active in your working memory. The residue is not just a passive smear. It is an active biological process draining your focus. Let us contrast this with how someone who produces at an elite level actually works. Consider a highly successful academic, someone who publishes an absurdly high rate of peer-reviewed papers while also writing best-selling books. Researchers who study productivity have found that the very best performers do not actually work more hours than their peers. Often, they work fewer hours, but they use a different formula. The formula is this: high-quality work produced equals time spent multiplied by intensity of focus. Think about that for a moment. If your intensity of focus is low, because you are constantly slathering your mind with attention residue from task switching, you have to spend an enormous amount of time working just to produce a mediocre result. But if you can maximize your intensity of focus by isolating yourself and refusing to switch tasks, you drastically reduce the time required to produce a superior result. But here is the real tension. This requires a rejection of what feels comfortable. Human beings are naturally drawn to novelty. Our brains are wired to seek out new information. A ping on your phone triggers a tiny release of dopamine. It feels good in the short term. Working on a difficult, cognitively demanding task feels hard. It causes mental strain. So at the slightest hint of boredom or difficulty, our instinct is to seek the easy reward of a distraction. We are fighting our evolutionary biology. Clifford Nass, a communications professor who studied behavior in the digital age, found that people who constantly switch their attention online actually rewire their brains in a negative way. They lose the ability to filter out irrelevant information. They literally train their minds to become suckers for distraction. Nass discovered that once your brain becomes accustomed to on-demand distraction, it is incredibly hard to shake the addiction, even when you desperately want to concentrate. You cannot just tell yourself to be focused. Your mental muscles for concentration have atrophied. This means that reducing cognitive friction is not just a matter of trying harder. It is a matter of systemic rehabilitation. You have to retrain your brain to tolerate boredom and to sustain attention without demanding an immediate escape hatch. This is why the concept of attention residue is so crucial. It moves the conversation away from morality and places it firmly in the realm of biology and physics. You are not a bad person for checking social media, but you are subjecting your brain to a physiological process that guarantees you will underperform. When we realize that the cost is a physical limitation on our intelligence, the stakes change entirely. We are no longer just talking about time management. We are talking about the preservation of our mind. Let us bring this idea all the way down to earth. How does this cognitive friction actually show up in your daily life? I want to give you a few specific scenarios. As I describe them, I want you to notice if any of this sounds intimately familiar. Scenario number one, the meeting buffer. You have a highly important meeting starting in 10 minutes. You want to be fully present and sharp for it. You have prepared your notes, but you have 10 minutes to kill. So what do? You open your inbox. You scroll through the new messages. You see an email from a frustrated client. It is complicated. You read it, your heart rate elevates slightly, but you know you cannot solve it in the next 5 minutes. So you flag it to deal with later. You walk into your important meeting. You sit down. You smile. But your mind is not in the room. A massive chunk of your cognitive bandwidth is currently trapped in the unresolved tension of that client email. You struggle to follow the nuances of the conversation happening in front of you. You miss a subtle cue from a colleague. You give a generic answer to a complex question. You think you were just being efficient with those 10 minutes before the meeting. In reality, you sabotaged your performance in the meeting by intentionally coating your brain in attention residue. Scenario number two, the omnipresent phone. You are sitting at your kitchen table on a Saturday morning. You have decided this is the morning you are going to write that personal essay you have been dreaming about. Or maybe you are going to finally map out the business plan for your side project. You open your laptop. You start to type, but your smartphone is sitting right next to your keyboard, facing up. You are not touching it. You are not actively looking at it. But every 15 minutes, the screen lights up with a notification. It is a news alert, or a WhatsApp message, or an Instagram notification. You do not pick it up. You just glance at the screen to see what it is, decide it is not important, and look back at your screen. You feel virtuous because you did not pick up the phone, but the damage is already done. That half-second glance was a context switch. Your brain had to process the notification, recognize the sender, evaluate the urgency, suppress the urge to reply, and then reorient back to the essay. That is immense cognitive friction. You spend the next 2 hours feeling like writing is like pulling teeth. You conclude that you just do not have the talent for it, or that you are not inspired today. You are wrong. You just never allowed your brain to reach the level of depth where inspiration actually lives. Scenario number three, the fragmented evening. It is 7:30 in the evening. You are at home. The workday is supposedly over. You are sitting on the couch talking with your partner about where to go for your next holiday. It is a pleasant, meaningful conversation. But your laptop is open on your lap, and you are periodically refreshing an industry news site or checking a Slack channel for your remote team. Your partner asks you a question about a specific hotel. You answer them, but your eyes drift to the screen to read a headline. You switch back to the conversation. You switch back to the screen. You are physically present, but emotionally and intellectually, you are a ghost. Your partner can feel it. They feel unheard. They feel like they are competing with a machine for your basic presence. The attention residue here is not just hurting your work. It is leaching the warmth and connection out of your most important relationships. You are living in a state of permanent semi-distraction where nothing gets your full ability to care. Scenario number four, the illusion of research. You are tasked with learning a difficult new skill for your job. Let us say you need to learn a new programming language or master a complex financial modeling software. You dedicate the afternoon to it. You open the tutorial videos and the digital textbook. But you also leave your email open in another tab, and you leave Twitter open on your phone. You tell yourself that learning is hard, so taking quick breaks to check the news will keep you refreshed. You read a paragraph of the textbook, then you check Twitter. You watch 5 minutes of a tutorial, then you reply to an email. 3 hours pass. You feel exhausted. Your brain is buzzing. But when you try to apply the new skill, you realize you have retained almost nothing. You cannot remember the syntax. You cannot recall the steps. Why? Because learning hard things quickly requires intense, uninterrupted concentration. It requires isolating a specific neural circuit in your brain and firing it repeatedly so that myelin can build up around the neurons. By constantly switching your attention to the news in your email, You fire dozens of different neural circuits simultaneously and haphazardly. You never isolated the skill. You never allowed your brain to physically cement the knowledge. You spent 3 hours creating friction instead of building competence. I suspect that at least one of these scenarios made you think, that is exactly what I do. And if it did, please know that you are absolutely not alone. We have all been conditioned to behave this way by the tools we use and the culture we work in. But recognizing the friction in your actual daily life is the first necessary step to removing it. It is the moment you realize that your environment is not serving your highest goals. Now, let us zoom out. What does this idea of attention residue and cognitive friction mean at a much larger scale? What does it mean for our society, for how human beings are wired, and for the future of our world? We are currently living through a massive economic restructuring. The rise of complex digital technology is changing the labor market in ways we have never seen before. Economists have pointed out that in this new economy, the people who will thrive are the ones who can master hard things quickly and the ones who can produce at an elite level. If you can write beautiful, complex code, or if you can analyze massive data sets to find hidden trends, or if you can write profound, moving narratives, your value is essentially limitless. But as we have just established, mastering hard things and producing elite results absolutely depend on your ability to work deeply without the friction of constant distraction. Here is the grand paradox of our time. At the exact moment in history when deep, focused work is becoming the most valuable currency in the global economy, it is simultaneously becoming increasingly rare. A massive segment of the professional population is rapidly forgetting how to concentrate. A widely cited study found that the average knowledge worker now spends more than 60% of their work week engaged in electronic communication and internet searching. Close to 30% of a worker's time is dedicated purely to reading and answering email. People are spending their entire days behaving like human network routers, constantly sending and receiving short messages. They are living in a permanent state of frenetic shallowness. And the tragedy is that this is not just a temporary bad habit. If you spend enough time in this state of fragmented attention, you permanently reduce your capacity to perform deep work. You chip away at your own capacity for contemplation. This means we are creating a society where the vast majority of people are physically losing the ability to think deeply about complex problems. But for you, listening to this trend exposes a massive personal and economic opportunity. If you can cultivate the skill of sustained attention, if you can protect your mind from cognitive friction, you will possess a superpower in the 21st century. While your peers are exhausting themselves jumping between 30 different open tabs, producing muted, mediocre quality because their brains are smeared with residue, you will be producing the kind of innovative, undeniable value that is hard to replicate. And it goes beyond just economic success. It touches on the very meaning of a good life. There is a deep philosophical argument to be made here. Decades of psychological research have shown that human beings are at their best, their absolute happiest, when they are immersed deeply in something challenging. The psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi called this state flow. It is the feeling of stretching your mind to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something worthwhile. When you are in a state of flow, there is no attention left over to worry about irrelevant problems. Your consciousness becomes perfectly ordered. When you allow cognitive friction and attention residue to dominate your days, you are actively robbing yourself of the experience of flow. You are guaranteeing that your working life will be experienced as a draining roil of stress, irritation, and superficiality. But when you eliminate the friction, when you commit to depth, you tap into a rich vein of meaning. Whether you are forging a sword out of steel with your bare hands or crafting an elegant algorithm on a computer, the intense, uninterrupted focus required is the same. It generates a profound sense of satisfaction. It makes life feel worthwhile. A life built around depth, a life that aggressively rejects the constant tug of shallow distraction, is not just a more productive life. It is fundamentally a better life. It is a life well lived. We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today. We started by looking at the invisible drag on our minds, the attention residue that lingers every time we switch our focus. We explored how the Zeigarnik effect makes unresolved tasks haunt our working memory, and how elite producers leverage intensity to bypass this friction entirely. We saw how this plays out in our meetings, our evenings, and our attempts to learn. And finally, we zoomed out to see the massive advantage that awaits anyone willing to protect their focus in a distracted world. If there is one concrete thing I want you to do differently this week, it is this: practice the art of the clean break. Tomorrow, when you sit down to do a piece of work that matters, I want you to completely quarantine your distractions. Do not just minimize your email window. Close the application entirely. Put your phone in another room. Decide that for the next 60 minutes, you will not switch your context. When the urge to check a message arises, and it will, I want you to view that urge not as a harmless impulse, but as an active threat to your cognitive architecture. Resist it. Force your brain to stay with the problem. Experience what it feels like to operate without the fog of residue. It will feel uncomfortable at first, like exercising a muscle that has not been used in years. But push through that discomfort, because on the other side of that friction is a level of clarity and brilliance that you might have forgotten you possess. Your attention is your most precious resource. It is the lens through which you construct your reality. Do not let it be fractured by the endless, trivial demands of the network. Choose where you point your focus and then guard it fiercely. Thank you so much for your time and your deep attention today. It is a privilege to share this space with you. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of your mind.